My son didn't raise his voice when he told me to leave. That's what stayed with me. No anger, no hesitation. Just a sentence delivered the way someone talks about changing cable providers or rescheduling a meeting. It's time you find somewhere else. He said it across the kitchen table, one hand wrapped around his coffee mug, already halfway through his morning routine. Rebecca stood at the sink with her back to us, rinsing a plate that was already clean. She didn't turn around, she didn't need to. I remember holding my spoon in midair, oatmeal cooling in the bowl, and thinking, I must have misheard him. I'm in my early 70s. My hearing isn't what it used to be. That was the explanation I offered myself first because it was kinder than the truth. Excuse me, I asked. Jake looked at me then, not sharply, not cruelly, just firmly. Like someone who had already rehearsed this conversation and was relieved to finally be done with it. We've been talking, he said, and we think it would be better if you found a place more suited for you. We've been talking. That was how I knew this wasn't a discussion. It was a decision. Before I go any further, let me pause for a moment. If you're listening right now, tell me in the comments which city or country you're listening from. And if stories like this resonate with you, quiet stories about family, dignity, and unexpected strength, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Jake continued, unaware that my world had just shifted a few inches off its axis. This house isn't really working for us anymore, he said. We're thinking about renovating, expanding, maybe turning part of it into an office. Rebecca finally turned around then, drying her hands slowly. And we're saying this with love, Helen, she added, her voice smooth, careful. We just want what's best for everyone, including you. Everyone, not me, everyone else. I looked around the kitchen, my kitchen. The yellow paint I chose decades ago, the ceramic rooster on the shelf, the table Jake's father built with his own hands when Jake was still small enough to sit on the counter and swing his legs. I had buried my husband from this house. Raised my son here, watched my granddaughter take her first steps across this floor, and now I was being told politely, reasonably, that I had overstayed my welcome. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I nodded once and folded my napkin slowly, buying myself time. So you've made up your minds, I said. Jake exhaled, relieved. We'll help you look, of course, maybe even cover the first couple months if things are tight. Tight. I thanked him not because I needed to, but because old habits are hard to break. That night, long after they'd gone upstairs, I sat alone in the living room. My chair faced the fireplace that never worked quite right. Jake always said he'd fix it. He never did. I wrapped a blanket around my knees and stared at the shadows on the wall. 47 years, that's how long I'd lived in this house. I remembered the day my husband and I stood on this land when it was nothing but weeds and rocks and possibility. We had barely any savings, one rusted truck, and more hope than sense. We built this place board by board, paycheck by paycheck. This wasn't just a house, it was my life stitched into wood and walls. They thought I would go quietly, find a small room somewhere, fade into something manageable. Maybe that's what I'd taught them to expect. I went upstairs slowly and sat on the edge of my bed. In the drawer of the nightstand was a small black book I'd kept for decades. Old habit. Household notes, receipts, memories. Tucked neatly between 2 pages was the original deed to the house. My name, my husband's name, paid in full more than 20 years ago. I closed the drawer and sat very still. The thing about being underestimated is that people stop paying attention. They forget what you've endured, what you've built, what you're capable of when you finally decide to move. Jake thought I would be gone soon. Rebecca thought the problem had been handled. They were wrong. Because while they slept upstairs, confident and unbothered, I made a decision of my own. And by the time my son came home from work, the house he thought he controlled would no longer belong to him at all. The morning after Jake told me to leave, I woke before the sun. I always have. Old habits settle into the bones. Even when your place in the house has been quietly downgraded, your body still remembers responsibility. I lay there for a moment, listening. The house has a sound when it's sleeping, pipes ticking, floorboards settling, the refrigerator humming like it's thinking. This house has always spoken to me. It knows my step, or at least it used to. I pulled on my robe and went downstairs without turning on the lights. I didn't need them. I could walk this place blindfolded. I brewed coffee even though no one else drank it. Rebecca preferred something imported and bitter. Jake drank whatever was closest and complained about the taste. I carried my mug to the porch and sat on the swing, wrapping my hands around the warmth. Fog hung low over the yard, softening the edges of everything. For a moment, the world looked like it used to, quiet, forgiving. That was when I realized something important. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger takes energy, and I was conserving mine. What I felt instead was something heavier. A settling. Like dust on furniture no one bothers to move anymore. They think I'll just go, I thought. They think I'll make this easy. The porch creaked beneath me. My late husband used to say that meant the house was greeting you. I hear you, I whispered. Behind me, the door opened. Small footsteps padded across the porch. Grandma, Ellie, she stood there in her pajamas, hair tangled, clutching the corner of her blanket. 9 years old and already observant enough to sense when something in the air had shifted. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She shook her head and climbed into my lap without asking, like she'd done when she was small. Her head rested against my shoulder, light as a question. They were talking last night, she said quietly. I didn't ask who they were. What did you hear? I asked. She shrugged. Daddy sounded mad. Mommy sounded polite. That made me smile, though not kindly. Ellie tilted her head and studied my face in that way children do when they're trying to read between the lines adults don't think they show. Are you going somewhere? She asked. There it was, the question no one else had bothered to ask me directly. Maybe, I said, her fingers tightened in my robe. I don't want you to. I know, I said softly. She didn't cry, she never did. Ellie absorbed things quietly, like she was storing them away for later understanding. Mommy says you'd be happier someplace smaller, she said after a moment. I stared out at the yard, the garden I used to tend every Saturday, now half forgotten. Happier for who? I asked. Ellie didn't answer. At breakfast, the house returned to its usual rhythm. Rebecca clattered cabinets louder than necessary. Jake scrolled on his phone, already half at work. I set out toast, cut fruit, cleaned as I always had. No one mentioned last night. That, I realized, was worse than the conversation itself. They had already moved on. Rebecca finally spoke as she poured herself a green drink that smelled like grass. So, she said casually, have you given any thought to what Jake mentioned? I buttered my toast slowly. You mean leaving? I asked. She gave that tight smile, the one she used when she wanted credit for being patient. Well, yes, we just want to make sure you have options. There's a lovely senior community near Brookstone Heights. They do activities. Housekeeping. I had kept this house running for decades with little more than vinegar, patience, and a stubborn sense of duty. I'll think about it, I said. Jake looked up, relieved again. That look hurt more than anything else. Later that morning, when the house emptied, Jake to work, Rebecca to whatever carefully scheduled life she curated, I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door. I opened the nightstand drawer again. This time I didn't just look at the deed. I took it out. I sat on the bed and let the paper rest in my hands. My name, my husband's name, proof that this place was not something I'd been allowed to stay in, but something I had built, owned, and paid for. I moved to the closet and reached for the lockbox on the top shelf. My fingers knew the code without thinking. Muscle memory, trust in myself. Inside were the things that mattered: legal documents, insurance papers, savings Jake didn't know about, money I'd never touched because I believed emergencies were something you waited for. Maybe this was the emergency. I sat very still, then reached for my address book, the real one, paper soft and worn from years of hands. I flipped until I found a name I hadn't said out loud in a while. Charlotte Monroe. We'd been friends since before gray hair meant invisibility. She'd buried a husband too. She understood discretion, timing, silence. I picked up the phone and dialed. She answered on the third ring. Helen, her voice warmed immediately. Well, I'll be damned. I need your help, I said, quietly. There was a pause, not suspicion, understanding. All right, she said. What do you need? I want to sell my house. Another pause, this one heavier. Helen, are you sure? Yes, I said, and Jake doesn't need to know, not yet. She didn't ask why. That's how I knew I'd chosen the right ally. When we hung up, I stood alone in the bedroom and looked around. This room had held my grief, my healing, my silence. It would hold my exit too. Downstairs, the clock ticked on the wall Jake passed every day without seeing. The same clock I'd wound for years. I began to write a list. What to keep, what to give away, what to let go, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. They thought I was being moved. What they didn't know was that I had already started moving myself. And when Charlotte arrived to walk through the house, clipboard in hand and eyes sharp with recognition, I realized something else. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment the house, and everyone in it, stopped taking me for granted. Charlotte came the next afternoon, just after Rebecca left with the car and Jake shut himself into the den for back-to-back meetings. She parked down the street. That alone told me she understood exactly what quietly meant. I opened the door before she could knock. We stood there for a moment, two women in our 70s reading each other's faces without words. "Well," she said gently, stepping inside, "it still smells like lemon polish and history." "I never could shake either," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one my husband built with uneven legs and a stubborn streak. Charlotte laid out her folder but didn't open it right away. She waited. "How bad is it?" she asked. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. "He asked me to leave," I said. "Not cruelly, practically." Charlotte nodded. "That's often worse." She opened the folder then. Papers, forms, no glossy brochures, no cheerful slogans, just facts. "We can do this discreetly," she said. "No sign, no listing photos online, appointment-only viewings. Buyers who don't talk? That's what I want," I said. "Someone who needs a home, not a project." She smiled. "I know a few." We walked through the house together, not like agents do measuring, judging, but like women paying respects. Charlotte ran her hand along the stair rail. "You kept this solid." "I built it solid," I said. She paused in the living room, studying the light. "This place has good bones and a long memory." "Then it deserves someone who listens," I said. She stopped in the doorway of my bedroom, didn't step in, just looked. "You sure you're ready?" she asked quietly. I thought of Ellie's arms around my waist, of Jake's relieved nod, of Rebecca's tight smile. "I've been ready longer than I realized," I said. That night I packed my first box. Not clothes, memories, recipe cards, the quilt my mother made, a small tin of nails my husband never threw away because you never know. I labeled the box carefully. Keep. The next morning the first showing was scheduled. Rebecca didn't know, Jake didn't ask. I baked banana bread anyway, not to impress but because the house deserved to smell like itself one last time. The couple arrived quietly. Elaine and Martin, they were older than Jake, younger than me, tired in the honest way. Elaine didn't talk much, she touched things gently. The windowsill, the door frame. Martin went straight to the backyard. "Peach tree," he said. "Still blooms?" "Yes," I said. "Fruit's gone bitter," he nodded. "That happens, still beautiful though." Inside, Elaine stood in the hallway and smiled. "This house feels held," she said. I felt something loosen in my chest. We sat at the kitchen table and shared banana bread. No one talked about renovations. No one mentioned knocking down walls. When they left, Charlotte met my eyes. "They want to make an offer," she said. "Already?" "They said it feels like the house was waiting." I looked around, at the scratches, the uneven floor, the life worn into every surface. "So was I," I said. We waited a day, then another. 2 more inquiries came in. Younger buyers. Louder plans. Charlotte didn't even bring them to me. "I know your answer," she said. Elaine and Martin came back with paperwork. They asked one thing. "Could we meet you again?" Elaine said, "before we finalize, not as the seller. As you." That night I slept better than I had in months. The morning of the signing, Rebecca was in rare form, pleasant, efficient, distant. "Jake and I are thinking about the layout," she said casually. "Once you're settled elsewhere, of course." I smiled into my coffee. Jake kissed my cheek on his way out. "We'll talk later, Mom." I nodded. Later had already passed. At the office, the pen felt heavier than I expected. Not sad, final. I signed my name with steady hands. Helen Mayfield. When the last page slid into place, the escrow officer smiled. "Congratulations." I didn't correct her. On the way home, I stopped at the bank, set up a trust, my name first. Ellie's second. That night I placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Jake's name, no explanation, just truth. I packed my bags while they were gone, locked the door behind me, slipped the keys through the mail slot. And as the taxi pulled away, I didn't look back. Because some chapters don't need rereading. And some homes stop being yours long before you leave them. By the time Jake came home that evening, the house was already gone. I didn't hear Jake's voice when he came home. I heard the door first. Not the normal open and close rhythm of a weekday evening, but something sharper. Faster. The sound of a door opening twice, then stopping halfway as if he'd stepped back to look again. I was already gone, not missing. Gone. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the scene with painful clarity. Jake standing in the entryway, jacket still on, work bag hanging from his shoulder. Rebecca probably behind him, heels clicking, phone in her hand. The pause, the silence. The way a house sounds different when it's no longer waiting for you, they would have noticed the first thing immediately. The envelope. Jake's name, written in my careful handwriting, resting on the kitchen table like it had been placed with intention. Because it had. Inside were only two things: the sale agreement. Charlotte's contact information. No note, no explanation. I didn't owe them one. The call came an hour later. My phone buzzed on the small bedside table of the motel room I'd checked into under my maiden name. I let it buzz until it stopped. Then again, Jake's name filled the screen. I didn't answer, not because I was angry, because silence when chosen is no longer weakness. Rebecca's messages came next. Short, sharp. Is this a joke? You can't do this. We had plans. I turned the phone face down and poured myself a glass of water, sat on the edge of the bed, felt the quiet. It was the first time in years the quiet didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space. The next morning I went for a walk. The motel wasn't special. 2 stories, faded paint. But the air smelled like pine and early fall, and no one knew me well enough to expect anything. When I came back, there were more messages. Jake again, longer this time. Mom, please call me. Why would you do this without telling us? The kids are confused. Rebecca is upset. We need to fix this. Fix. I sat on the edge of the bed and read the message twice. He still hadn't asked if I was okay. At noon, Charlotte called. It's done, she said calmly. Funds cleared, recorded, they're the owners now. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said. You all right? I am, I said, and meant it. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a nap, no tension in my chest, no listening for footsteps, no wondering if I was in the way, just rest. When I woke, my phone was buzzing again. This time I answered. Mom, Jake said immediately. His voice sounded different. Smaller. Where are you? I'm safe, I said. That's not what I asked. I know. A pause. You sold the house, he said, like he was still testing the words. Yes. You didn't even talk to us. I thought of the kitchen table, the oatmeal. His steady voice telling me it was time to leave. You spoke, I said. I listened. Rebecca's voice cut in, sharp and breathless. This is unbelievable. We were going to renovate. We were trying to make things better. For who? I asked quietly. Silence. You blindsided us, Jake said. I almost laughed. I know exactly how that feels, I said. Another pause, longer this time. Where are you staying? He asked. For now, somewhere quiet. You didn't have to disappear like this. I looked out the window at the trees swaying in the wind. I didn't disappear, I said. I stepped out of the way. The line went quiet. Then Jake spoke again, slower. I came by the house this morning. My chest tightened despite myself. The new owners were there. They were polite. They said you'd been there earlier. Yes. It doesn't feel like home anymore, he said. No, I replied. It doesn't. Another long silence. I didn't realize, he said finally. That's true, I said. You didn't. We ended the call without anger, without closure, just truth hanging between us. That evening, I sat in the small motel room and unpacked one box. The quilt, the recipe cards, the tin of nails. I placed them carefully, like anchoring myself in unfamiliar ground. On the second night, I slept deeply. On the third day, I went to see the cottage. It was smaller than the house. No stairs, no echo, just sunlight and a small porch that faced west. This place doesn't ask much, the owner said. It lets you be. I signed the lease that afternoon. When Jake called again that night, I let it ring. Not forever, just long enough for him to sit with the feeling. Because some realizations don't arrive through conversation. They arrive through absence. And while he was finally learning what it meant to lose a home, I was learning what it felt like to arrive in my own life again. The cottage smelled like fresh paint and old books. That combination felt right. I moved in slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to feel every choice I made. Every object I placed had meaning now. Nothing went anywhere by accident. The quilt went over the back of the chair near the window. The chipped teacup sat by the sink. Tom's flannel hung on a single hook by the door. No one sighed when I took my time. No one watched to see if I was in the way. For the first time in years, the silence belonged to me. Jake called 2 days later. I didn't answer. Not because I was punishing him, because I was still listening to myself. Ellie was the first one to visit. Jake asked carefully if she could come by for the afternoon. His voice was different now. Not rushed, not entitled. Only if she wants to, I said. She arrived with a backpack and a drawing folded so carefully it was creased in 4 places. This is your new house, she said, unfolding it proudly. In the picture, I stood on the porch holding a pie. The house was small. The windows were crooked, and I was smiling. It's perfect, I told her. We made pancakes together the next morning. She cracked the eggs too hard. Flour ended up on the counter, on the floor, on her nose. She laughed like the world hadn't taught her to be careful yet. Grandma, she asked suddenly, why don't you live with us anymore? I wiped my hands on a towel and thought carefully. Because sometimes, I said, when people stop seeing you, you have to step back so they remember. She frowned. Did it work? I smiled. Ask your dad. Jake came by later that afternoon. He stood at the door longer than necessary, tulips in his hand like he wasn't sure where to put them. You look different, he said. So do you, I replied. We sat at the small table. Our knees bumped awkwardly. He didn't complain. I've been thinking, he said. A lot. I waited. I didn't realize how much space you were taking up until it was gone, he admitted. I thought I was helping. I was just clearing my path. I didn't argue. I don't need you to fix anything, I said. I just needed you to see it. He nodded. I do now. Rebecca didn't come. I didn't ask. That night, after Ellie left and the tulips sat in a jar by the window, I opened the drawer where I'd placed the trust documents. Ellie's name was written carefully beneath mine, not as inheritance, as protection. The next morning, I woke early and made tea, sat on the porch, watched the light change. No one needed me to be anything, and that, I realized, was freedom. The phone buzzed once. A message from Jake. Thank you for not disappearing. I typed back one sentence. I never did. And for the first time in a long while, I felt certain of something. I hadn't lost a home. I'd reclaimed myself. And what came next would not be built on sacrifice. It would be built on choice. The quiet didn't disappear after Jake left. That surprised me. I had expected the familiar ache to return, the one that crept in after visits, after apologies that came too late, after moments that almost felt like repair. But instead, the cottage stayed calm, as if it had no interest in holding onto emotions that didn't belong to it. I woke the next morning without that heaviness in my chest. No tight breath. No mental checklist of what I needed to do for someone else before the day could start. Just morning. I made tea and stood at the sink, watching steam curl upward like it had nowhere urgent to be. Outside, a neighbor walked her dog slowly, unbothered by time. She waved. I waved back. We didn't exchange names. That felt perfect. Later that afternoon, I drove to the library. I hadn't told anyone I was going. Not because it was a secret, but because I didn't need permission. The librarian helped me sign up for a reading circle. Thursdays, quiet group, no pressure to speak. You're welcome to just listen, she said kindly. I've been doing that my whole life, I replied with a small smile. That evening, Jake called again. I answered this time. Mom, he said, softer than before. I found something. My stomach tightened just slightly. What did you find? The old drawer, the one in the hallway. He hesitated. With the checks. I said nothing. I didn't realize, he continued, how much you paid for everything for me. I closed my eyes. That drawer wasn't meant as a reminder, I said. It was just history. I never said thank you, he admitted. No, I said calmly, you didn't. The silence stretched, but it wasn't sharp. I'm sorry, he said finally. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Rebecca didn't speak to me directly, but I heard about her through Jake, her frustration, her embarrassment, her anger that things had moved without her approval. I didn't feel vindicated, I felt finished. Ellie sent me a voice message the next day. Grandma, she said, whispering like it was a secret, I told my friend you're brave. She asked why. I said because you didn't stay somewhere you weren't happy. I sat with that for a long time. Brave, I'd never thought of myself that way. The following week, I attended my first reading circle. I sat near the window, listened. Let other people's words move through me without needing to respond. When it ended, a woman beside me leaned over. You're new, she said. Yes, I replied. You seem peaceful. I smiled. I worked for it? That night, I opened Ellie's envelope again, not to change anything, just to remind myself why it existed, not to control the future, to soften it. Jake came by again the following Sunday. Alone. He didn't bring flowers this time, he brought himself. I don't expect things to go back, he said carefully. They won't, I agreed. But I'd like to build something new, slowly. I studied his face, the tension. The humility that hadn't been there before. That depends, I said. On what? On whether you remember this feeling, I replied. The one where you realized I'm not background. He nodded. I won't forget. I believed him, not completely. But enough. After he left, I walked through the cottage and noticed something I hadn't before. I was humming. Not loudly, not consciously, but freely. And for the first time since Jake told me to leave, I understood something important. This wasn't about losing a house. It was about gaining a voice. And now that I'd found it, I wasn't interested in lowering it again. Not for anyone. There's a moment after something breaks cleanly when you expect the pieces to keep cutting you. I waited for that. I assumed grief would circle back, heavier this time. That the absence of the old house, the old routines, the familiar friction would come looking for me in the quiet hours. But it didn't. What arrived instead was something steadier. Acceptance. The days in the cottage settled into a rhythm that didn't require explanation. Morning tea, a walk down the block, a chapter or two of whatever book was open on the table. I stopped measuring time by usefulness and started noticing it by feeling. Jake called regularly now, short conversations, no urgency, no expectation that I would solve anything. One afternoon, he said something that stayed with me. I didn't know how much I depended on you being there, he admitted. Not helping, just available. I understood that kind of dependence. It looks like love until it becomes entitlement. I was always there, I said. I just stopped disappearing for you. Rebecca remained distant. That was all right, not every relationship earns another version. Ellie visited more often. She brought homework, questions, stories about school that wandered in every direction before landing nowhere in particular. One evening, while she colored at the table, she looked up suddenly. Grandma, she said, you're different now? Different how? Bigger, she said after thinking. Not like taller, like more you, I laughed quietly. That's a good way to put it. Jake overheard her from the porch. He didn't interrupt. Later, when Ellie was gone, he said, she's right, you know. I hope so, I replied. He shifted in his chair. I've been thinking about Dad. That caught me off guard. He wouldn't have liked how I handled things, Jake said. He would have told me I forgot who built the ground I was standing on. I didn't correct him. Sometimes people need to arrive at truth without assistance. I wish I'd listened sooner, he added. Listening isn't something you do once, I said. It's something you practice. He nodded, absorbing that. That night after he left, I opened the drawer again. Ellie's envelope, the trust documents, the note I'd written weeks earlier. I added one more page, not legal, personal. A letter for her to read one day, explaining why I chose dignity over comfort. Why I chose clarity over endurance. Because someone had to model it. The following Thursday, I skipped the reading circle and drove past the old neighborhood. Not to revisit, to confirm. The house looked different already. Fresh flowers on the porch. Curtains open. The garden trimmed but not erased. Elaine waved when she saw me. Martin was on a ladder adjusting the porch light. They looked right. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That chapter had closed cleanly. On the way home, I stopped at the bakery and bought a small cake, nothing fancy. I lit a candle that evening and sat alone at the table. Not a birthday, an anniversary. The day I stopped shrinking, I made a quiet wish, not for forgiveness or validation or reconciliation, just for steadiness. For the courage to never return to being unseen. As the candle burned low, my phone buzzed. A message from Jake. Thank you for staying, even when you left. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I replied, I never left myself again. And in that moment, I knew the hardest part was behind us, not because everything was fixed, but because I was finally whole. And that kind of wholeness changes everything that comes after. There's a certain quiet that only comes after everything has been said, not the silence of avoidance, not the silence of resentment. The kind that settles when nothing is left unresolved inside you. That was the quiet I woke up to now. The cottage had learned me. The floor no longer creaked in surprise. The kettle whistled like it expected to be answered. Even the light through the window arrived gently, as if it knew where to land. I made tea and sat at the table, the small one just big enough for 2 cups if needed, but perfect for one. I thought about how long it had taken me to understand something so simple. Staying isn't always loyalty. Sometimes it's fear disguised as love. Leaving isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's self-respect finally given a voice. Jake came by later that morning. He didn't call first this time, but he waited at the door until I opened it. That mattered. "I won't stay long," he said. "I just wanted to check in." We sat on the porch, no agenda. No apologies hovering in the air. He told me about work, about slowing down, about noticing things he'd missed when everything had been about expansion and improvement. "I thought success meant building more," he said. "Turns out it also means knowing when to stop." I nodded. "That's something people learn the hard way." He hesitated, then added, "Rebecca's still struggling." I didn't respond immediately. "I'm not asking you to fix it," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. Ellie arrived in the afternoon. She kicked off her shoes without asking and went straight to the kitchen, humming to herself like she belonged there. Because she did, we baked together again. This time she didn't spill anything. Progress. While the cookies cooled, she sat cross-legged on the floor and looked around. "Grandma," she said, "I like this house." "I do too. It feels calm." "That's because no one here is trying to disappear," I said. She smiled, satisfied with that answer. Before she left, she hugged me tightly. The kind of hug that doesn't ask for reassurance, just presence. That night after the cottage went quiet again, I opened the drawer one last time. Ellie's envelope, the letters, the past, neatly folded and no longer heavy. I didn't add anything. The story was finished. I stepped outside and sat on the porch, listening to the wind move through the trees. Somewhere down the street, someone laughed. Somewhere else, a door closed gently. Life moving on. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. The kind that doesn't ask permission. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. You don't owe your silence to anyone. You don't owe your comfort to people who erase you. And you don't need permission to reclaim your own life. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave quietly and let the absence speak for you. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe to my channel.